Okay. I think we're live. Yes.
You think so?
All right. Hey, folks. You are getting me and Ben, Max and Ben today, for the end of week wrap up and Q&A, as the folks who normally do it aren't feeling so well. So we are here to read off the highlights of progress from the week, and then you can ask questions. I'm pretty sure most of the questions are going to be for Ben.
We don't usually get story questions.
We sometimes we get a couple. But I can answer those. But I am a writer. Ben is a designer, and Ben's going to kick us off with the top 10ish, right?
All right. Yep, that's what we're going to do. So number one of our top 10 this week is work in progress tech rams. This week, Spuddy continued to work on rams. Rams now have 7 control points, 6 for pushing, and 1 for the rams swing ability, which was just added in, and it actually animates now, which is really cool. Rams will now do damage in an area in front of them. Theoretically, that's still a bit of a work in progress.
I added this. Bam!
And Max added bam to the text. Extra writing flavors. He also updated them so that they prefer moving in a forward direction, because they're sort of a cooperative moving endeavor, so all the inputs of all the players trying to move the ram, if you all try to run in different directions, it's not going to move. You have to kind of all push it in the right direction to go together, which should be a fun collaborative effort once we get some multiplayer testing in on that. And so that's rams. Number 2 is tech status persistence. So Christina landed a big win for us this week with landed status persistence. A player's current stance, which gear slots they have readied, will persist when traveling between zones, respawns, entering scenarios, and everything. So this has been a problem for a while now, where if you've been playing in any of our tests, you've been doing scenarios where you start out in one zone, you maybe go into your combat stance, you maybe switch which weapons you have, and then you go into a scenario and all that's reverted to the same way it was when you logged in. So now all that stuff will persist and save, so you won't have to switch those out every time you change zones. And that'll be helpful for us as well once we get into zone transitions, when we're doing multi-island testing and boats and everything. When you get on a boat to go from one island to another that's actually running on a different server, you won't lose your stances or whatever when the boat transitions from one zone to the next. So it's kind of an important thing. Number 3 is art for doors. Let's see, John finished modeling the new massive doors for Cherry Keep. These will now get animations and will be placed within the keep wall. So this is for the siege demo that we've been doing for the big keep that has... Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a main door for that will have an actual door. It sort of had a block-based door that was just sort of a facade previously, so this will make it an actual interactable object, and that'll have damage and animations and everything, which will be good. And number 4 is the tech for portal doors, which are not the type that open and close, but an actual like teleport in and out of the wall so that you can get in and out without letting enemies in. Christina landed the functionality behind portal type doors, and once complete with art and effects, these doors will allow defenders to enter and leave without granting attackers access to the keep. So this will let you have sort of a postern door or a smaller door to the side of your castle, so if you're trying to get in without opening the main door and letting all the enemies get in, you can sort of sneak around through the portal that you've put in the back of your building there. And then Max wanted to explain what number 5 is, I think.
Okay.
It's very tech heavy.
Yeah, this is definitely my area of expertise. Number 5 is work in progress tech visual effects. So this week, Wiley worked on system shared particle parameters, which gives us the option to randomize and animate collections of particles as a group instead of as individuals. This lets us really synchronize effects like color, rotation, velocity, sprites, etc. across an entire system. For example, if we have some leaves falling from a tree, this will allow us to... This is the example Wiley gave me as I understood it when I asked him what this meant. If we have some leaves falling from a tree, this will allow us to reliably do a color shift on all those leaves at the same time, make sure they're animating in at the right times, etc. So that's pretty cool.
So it's some very fancy visual effects tech that will make visual effects in a myriad
It'll
of
make
ways
us-
easier to make or better or something.
I guess it's makes them more synchronous
More
and
synchronous.
lets us do changes across them all at the same time. That's how I understood it
Okay.
when Wiley explained it to me.
All right. Number 6 after that is work in progress tech building destruction. So this week Colin worked on making items move dynamically when they become detached from a building. Buildings have been sort of made out of blocks with our block-based building system for a long time, and that's been most of what you've seen when you've seen videos or any clips of us doing building destruction. This is actually integrating items into that so that if you maybe have a siege engine or something, I think those are counting. It's like building place objects. Those will actually fall off properly. So if you'll have
Like a mounted weapon?
yeah, so if you have a scorpion or something on top of the wall and the wall collapses, the scorpion will actually like fall off properly.
That's
and
where I
not-
keep my scorpions.
Yeah, well, previously they would just disappear because
Right.
the blocks that they were sitting on were destroyed or turned into rubble, and so those they didn't just stick around. Now they'll actually stick around, and things will fall and collapse
that's
properly.
cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's actually pretty important for getting the rest of that sorted out for building destruction. And then the next one after that kind of ties in with work in progress BPOE detachment, which is building place object something. I'm not sure what E stands for there. But both to support Colin's work on making BPOs fall off when the building blocks are damaged and to address some Buildings Brigade concerns, Matt spent most of the week revisiting the core assumption that BPOs would be removed when their core attachment blocks was removed. Okay. When there shouldn't be any immediate observable effects right now, this will change and allow us to place larger objects like doors and have them behave more realistically. So basically what that means is there was previously an assumption that for any given placed object, there was a single block at the root of that object where it would be placed, and if that block was destroyed or became rubble, like became detached from a building because of stability or whatever, that object would then be parented to that single place. And we're making that not true anymore because a lot of our objects are like very big. So if you have like trebuchet or whatever, it won't just be placed on like one single block where it's parented to the building. It'll be based on its surface area, and if most of that gets destroyed, then it'll sort of fall over and behave more realistically. So that's what that's all about. Let's see, number 8, tech spatial query visual debugger. Do you want to read this one too?
Sure.
Okay, let's.
Number 8, Spatial Query Visual Debugger. Matt took a short break from working on BPOs to provide the rest of the gameplay team with a way to visually see, I like that phrase, visually see, I didn't write that, to visually see
you
the
edited it.
spatial, I did, I have to admit I did edit it, to visually see the spatial queries being run on the server for damage, NPC target selection, and more. This should help significantly with investigating bugs. So not really something that you folks are going to see, although you'll see the effect of us being able to investigate bugs more effectively.
Yeah, so that's just kind of one of the helpful things. It's hard for us to tell a lot of the time when stuff is going wrong. So if it's like, well, the particles are playing right, but the physics events aren't happening or damage isn't happening correctly, what's going on? Or the particles aren't playing right, but the damage is happening the way it's supposed to. Why are these two things mismatched? And so once we have a tool like this, we can actually see what's happening in physics without relying on the actual visual components of the ability, and then that lets us determine why things are happening wrongly when they don't seem to correlate or line up the way we expect them to at first. After that is number 9, SFX Corpse Chucker. DB has designed and implemented the sound effects for the Corpse Chucker, and
I hear it is very moving, Ben. It's very moving.
yeah.
Moo.
So, yeah. So there's now you can throw a cow with a trebuchet in the game now, if that is the thing that you want to do.
And it screams moo.
It kind of it's supposed to be dead, but it still does. I don't understand it. It's
still.
you can do it if you want to.
It's
if
still
you're in
moving.
any of our
It's
tests,
still moving.
It is.
Yeah. Mooing.
Number 10, bug fixes UI. AJ spent some time this week fixing issues with the UI. Buff and debuff icons next to your health bar are now separate into positive and negative effects. So that was previously, they were just in order of application, and now they're separated off categorically, so you can tell good things and bad things separately. Fixed a bug where not all the combat log messages were being shown, so the combat log should have some more information for you. Fixed a bug where the ability button icon is not updated if you modify the ability. Okay, so if you changed your icon, if you were going into the ability builder and you made an ability and then you wanted to change that icon to make it look like something else, that'll update properly now. Previously it wouldn't. And then we have a whole bunch of fixes as number 11 in gameplay, in which we spent a lot of time this week squashing bugs. I don't know if we want to actually go through and read all these. There's a lot of them in here.
Are any of them funny?
I don't know if any of these are particularly funny. Let's see.
Bugs that we squashed.
There was a bug where Furious Shock and Ally Administration would give infinite range, which I wouldn't say was particularly funny. It was definitely very broken, so you could infinite range heal, which was not incredibly good.
Good thing we fixed that.
Yeah, that's a good thing to fix.
There's a long list of bugs.
Yeah, there's basically just a long list of them
that we fixed. Yay!
And so these will be in the update if you want to go through and read all of these.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll send these out in our update later. If you want to go through and see what exactly all the line item bugs are under gameplay here, you can read those under that update. Number 12, art animations various. So Scott worked on one-headed weapons and mage cast with weapons anim sets for the male and female Lucrepan. He also retargeted the Lucrepan greatsword animation when the character is wearing a cape and or skirt. So that's pretty various, I suppose. A lot of that is just... So the way that our game works is we don't do any fancy cloth physics or real-time simulations that newer games typically do for things like cloaks. And so we have to do a lot of that stuff by hand in order to facilitate having a larger number of players, because it's kind of performance intensive if every player had a real-time simulated cloak or clothing or anything. So we kind of have to do some more manual work to facilitate that, but instead of actually making all of those animations like one-offs, they get retargeted from one skeleton to another, which is a lot faster than making custom animations. So that's what that's all about when you hear retargeted animations. That's taking an animation that was made once for one skeleton and moving it over to another skeleton with a lot less work than just making the whole animation a second time.
I have been wondering what that means.
Yeah. It's just efficiency in our process there. And then there's a work in progress art VFX. Mike is correcting color values on VFX to account for the recent change to use the correct color space in the game, which was previously different from in the editor. The colors were too saturated, and he's changing them to look better. So the rendering for the game and the editor are actually different pipelines, because the editor is a separate rendering application than the actual game client. And the look of particles was sort of different in the two previously, and Andrew fixed that, so now they kind of look more the same. I'm not sure if they look exactly the same. I think there's still some lighting things or exposure or something, but the saturation values now are correct. So you'll see if you look at the game, if you guys are in any of our testing, a lot of the particles will start looking a lot more saturated. Like fire looks very red now, where it was very white before. And now Mike is able to, because he sort of had to overcorrect before, so he super saturated it in the editor in order to make the white less white in the game. Now it's going to show truly what he was putting in the editor, which was too much, so he has to go back in and correct some of those. So that'll normalize it back out where it's not white and it's not red. It's sort of a normal orangey fire, and all the particles have to go through and do that. So you'll see some things be a bit wonky for a while, but this will allow us to actually get in and fix that and make everything look better. So better effects fidelity overall.
Yeah.
And then number 14, art animations bow basic attacks. This week Sandra finished up the short and long bow basic attacks. She added new attack timing to them and gave the attacks an overall coat of polish. So this will just be replacing the placeholder ones that were in, I think, or updating the older versions. They're because we've had archery in the game for a while, but these are new animations for them. So hopefully those will look quite a bit better. I haven't seen them yet, but I'll have to take a look at those and see.
Cool. 14 items.
14 items, not bad.
Not bad.
A lot of sub items.
Yeah, lots of sub items, some of which will be in the update because we felt a little silly reading them all off. But shall we take some questions?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So, folks, we're heading into the Q&A portion of our end of week wrap up and Q&A. So go ahead and ask your questions. Ben here is a designer for Camelot Unchained. I design the board game that we're working on and write lore. So go ahead and give us your questions. Adder Cortesia asks, can you salvage the fallen BPOs and siege weapons?
So the idea is for anything that's destroyed to have a destroyed state. Right now, everything when it dies just sort of pops out of existence. Even players do that, where you don't leave a corpse or anything. Once we have that sorted out, so that things that are destroyed have sort of rubble state or destroyed state or whatever you want to call it, you'll be able to go through and hopefully interact with that, use a salvaging ability on it, and get some materials back. The same thing if you have a placed object that you just don't want anymore. You can go up and use a salvaging mechanic to recall some materials back out of that placed object in the world.
O Bumble asks, for Ben, what are some of the initial balance issues that you are trying to address with the balance pass you've been working on?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so there's a lot. It's basically stepping through, like, starting off on a first balance pass, right? We did, like, a quick implementation on all the abilities where, largely because we're not working with a lot of tools right now, programmers are doing a lot of the implementation, just going off of some basic notes of, like, what everything is supposed to do, but not in terms of, like, what exactly all the numbers are for everything. Because a lot of that comes into actual tuning and adjustments when you get into the game. You can't necessarily say, like, oh, well, this projectile should travel at, 6 meters per second and not 7 meters per second. So it's kind of not worthwhile to say up front, here are all the values and they're perfect, and then go from there. So I'm going through and making a lot of those hand adjustments by going in and logging in as each of the classes, making a bunch of abilities, making up some test dummies or NPCs or whatever, and then using those abilities and seeing how they kind of look and feel, and doing some tests for, how much damage everything does, how strong buffs and debuffs are, how good some of the bonuses and penalties are, things like how much attack speed you get from haste, things like how much movement speed slow you get from disorient, things like that, how long stuff lasts. Just a whole bunch of things across the range, because this is sort of the first time that we've really done a balance pass, so it has to kind of be comprehensive and basically go through every single thing and tune it as best we can. That's a little bit harder to do in our game because we don't have a bunch of pre-made abilities. Like if we just had, every class has 20 abilities or 30 abilities or whatever, we just step through each of them. But because we have components, the actual number of potential combinations is really, really high. So basically I'm just going through and doing 1 or 2 combinations using each of the components. So you'll see, Spotted Mushroom gives you a attack cast time reduction, right? You cast faster. I'm not going through every single possible combination of spell and using that component with it. It's quite possible that as you go through and actually do testing, once this goes into external testing and players get to test it, you guys get to test it, you'll find some things that I didn't find because I wasn't testing as comprehensively as that. All of the possible combinations and things that will seem to be overpowered or underpowered there. So we'll be looking for feedback as we get into live testing, a lot more than you'll probably see in other games that don't have such a combinational system. But I'm just going through, like I said, right now and doing a base level pass on the core components and core combinations just to make sure that nothing is way out of balance and the basics kind of feel good. And then we'll work on refining the balance further from there as we get into testing and feedback.
Can we spy? Asks a question that sounds like their name. What is CSE's position on inter-guild spying and sabotage, as you would experience in other games?
So inter-guild spying, I would say like inter-faction spying, for sure, as we get into scouts especially, are really about intelligence and information and keeping up with cartography and mapping and where things are and discovering enemies and calling out their locations to allies. So you'll be able to spy on enemy realms. There's not really a cause to spy on other guilds in particular, although if you're basically at war with another guild, I mean, you're at war with the whole faction, really. But if you have a specific rival guild that you're targeting, you can certainly go out and try to get information specifically on, what mines that they're using, where they have outposts and fortifications, where their caravans are, if they're shipping stuff back and forth and trying to get resources, going out and specifically doing that sort of thing against guilds that are on other realms makes sense. Against guilds that are on your same realm, they're your allies. You can't attack them. There's nothing bad that they can really do to you. You might not always agree or like them or have to work with them or play with them or whatever, but there's no real spying when it comes to players of your same faction.
Michael Farrenborn on the YouTube chat. There is not an official date for Beta 2 as of yet. And for the prices of various tiers, check the store website.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, do you have an answer for this question? Yithro, I haven't paid much attention to the development in the last year. What are some of the biggest / coolest things I've missed?
Jeez,
you
probably might have a good idea of that. Like, what are because we've done all these updates, right?
I mean,
like in the past year.
I think I can only. I mean, I can't speak for, what you might think are the biggest, coolest things, or what we might think in general. I can only speak for myself. And I mean, I'd say, man, in the past year, testing Siege gameplay. And for me, mages, because I love mages.
Yeah.
Those two really stand out for me.
Yeah, I think for as far as stuff that I personally work on, I mean, there have been a lot of things in terms of the engine, like the building destruction stuff, the Siege demo that we're doing now, like a lot of those cool things. But me personally, the big thing that has happened in the last year, because a year's a long time, going back, is just going through and the recent updates to the ability system, because we were trying to get to the point where we could do mages before we did the last update, back when everything was still in XML, and we were having so many problems and so many difficulties, and we went through and did a bunch of major changes, moved a bunch of stuff into C#, and that allowed us to get not only mages in, but to remake all of the abilities for all of the other classes as well. And so we've gone through and done a huge remake of a lot of the functionality, like the scripting and the logic behind the way that things work now, that it's a lot more dynamic, it's a lot more data driven, and it's a lot easier to make things that properly affect other things in a way that we couldn't really easily do before. So there's a lot more flexibility in the system. It allows us to go a lot farther in a lot of the things that we're going to need eventually, going into things like the air system that allows, ability interactions and stuff like that we were going to have a really hard time with previously. So I think that's one of the big changes development wise that we've gone through, and it's led us to having mages in the game, like Max said, and now our current state of testing is getting a lot closer to where we're trying to get feedback on things like balance, as opposed to feedback on things like, does the game even work? Just like scale testing, right? Does it have good performance? Can we get a larger number of players in? Now we're going to get into, like, does this class have more damage than that class, and things like that. They're a lot more game driven. I think that's really one of the exciting things.
Big experiential things, like how you used your abilities, and smashing a hole in a wall from downtown with trebuchet and charging through it. Hey, can somebody answer the phone for me? So yeah, I think those definitely stand out. Okay.
But you can definitely go back through newsletters, probably.
Yeah.
If you're looking to catch up on the past year.
Mm-hmm.
Those will have a lot of the big things. It's not
Yeah.
as much. If you really care, you can go through all of our weekly updates and see all of the things that have happened. But if you're just looking for the highlights, I'd probably say go back through
there's
and
the,
just check out some of the newsletters.
There's the news links to the weekly news and the monthly newsletters that I put together that Ben is talking about. And those have most of the major updates mentioned in them. Okay. Can We Spy asks, can we get a better detailed explanation of how the panic feature works in PvP?
Okay. So this isn't in the game yet. That panic is a additional resource that hasn't really had a lot of gameplay exploration because it hasn't been able to be utilized. But now that our resources are more generic as opposed to the way that were previously implemented, as I was just saying, this is something we're going to be able to get in and start testing here in the not too distant future. Specifically as we get into support classes, because support classes have a little bit more interaction with Panic than the other classes that we have right now. But Panic is basically a resource that, as opposed to the other ones like Blood and Stamina, like Panic starts at 0. And as you take damage or have specific abilities used against you, different abilities have different amounts of Panic that they'll inflict on your character. And Panic sort of decays very slowly and builds with each ability use. So if you don't have a bad thing happen to you for a while, it'll sort of fall off. But if a bunch of people are using specifically Panic-focused abilities in a short period of time, your Panic will go up and up, and there are ways to get rid of it. There are classes that can reduce Panic as well. But if your Panic gets to a point where it maxes out, it's sort of the reverse of the way Stamina works, if you're familiar with that, where if you reach 0 stamina, you become exhausted, and it gets stuck at 0 for a while before it can regenerate. Panic sort of maxes out and then stays where your Panic is maxed out, and then you become vulnerable to specific effects that say this only works on targets who have reached their maximum Panic rating. And those can be very powerful, largely crowd control type of effects, and things we don't want to be able to have front loaded. So we don't want players going out and just immediately being able to do, a heavy control area of effect ability at the start of a fight, because that'll really control the outcome of the fight right from the beginning. But if you prep it right, you have this opportunity for people to counter it by removing their Panic and keeping it from maxing out or whatever. Then we feel that that's a lot more safe in terms of balance and fun of gameplay, because you have time to realize this is what's happening. They're trying to set this up, but if they set it up and they combine it properly, then they can build up Panic and then use their big effect right at the end when all the Panic is built up, and then that can have a pretty strong effect. So that's sort of the idea of Panic, and then as it gets used, of course, that also consumes it, so it goes back down, so you can't chain these effects and just keep people's Panic maxed out permanently. And so that sort of puts a limiter on how much of these powerful control effects can really happen, so that they can't be just either chained or just used as initiators. And we hope that that's a good way to sort of balance out the difference between having powerful crowd control and having players who don't want to necessarily have that happen to them as a big initiator, and having fights that are won just right from the beginning because people are instantly controlled in the very start of a fight.
I don't know if we know the answer to this, but Adric Cortesia asks, will we get some real visual effects for special debuffs, like the darker screen, blurry edges, or green tint for poison?
Oh, okay. So I think there's already... I was just looking at AJ's screen earlier today. I think there's already one of those that's going to go in for death when you have like a full screen death effect happen.
So based on you walking by AJ's screen...
Well, yeah, because
Possibly.
he was doing like with the screen when you die, right? And that's one where we want to have that sort of swipe effect or narrow down effect on that. There's not going to be a whole lot of those for specific buffs and debuffs, because you will get too many of them. Like some games do this, like when you're on fire or whatever, they'll put like fire at the edges of your screen. Those games don't have like 20 different things that can happen to you, because if they did, then like if you're on fire and bleeding and poisoned and have void tentacles or whatever, like if all of those things are happening to like the sides of your screen, then the sides of your
tentacles.
Screen just okay, maybe that's the so if we do that, we have to be pretty careful with it. There are cases like Stealth, I think, will probably have like a full screen sort of effect for going into the veil.
That'll be cool.
Death certainly has that sort of a thing. So we'll want to do some of those sort of things, but very carefully, because we don't want to overwhelm cases where a bunch of those things can all be happening at the same time.
Bumble asks, there used to be a CC immunity timer that prevented us from getting chains snared. Will that be coming back?
Yeah, so that, as I said, like we basically remade all of the logic for the way that abilities work. We didn't like completely like remake the whole ability system like we did once before. If you guys remember Rehabilitation, that was an actual like from the ground up restart of the whole system. So this was more of a restructuring of the way that the ability logic is able to be combined in the back end of the system. Like I said, it's going from putting data into XML to defining it in C#, which is different, and that allowed us to do some other things that were more clever. But that did mean that we lost some of those functions because those were all ability based, right? Like the immunity effect was an actual status effect that was defined as an XML object, and that hasn't been redefined in our new system for the ability system yet. I think exhaustion, I don't think you get exhausted right now either. Like if you run out of stamina, I think you can just keep running at full speed. You're supposed to become exhausted. I think some of those basic functional system effects are still not in yet, but they will be. It's just a matter of getting to them. We focused more in the first little bit of this on getting all of the abilities for all of the classes in and working, and now we're doing balance on that, and some of the other effects that are more systemic, like exhaustion and like immunity, those will be coming back here in the not too distant future. There's tasking for them, they just haven't been done yet, but they will be.
Cyvius asks, Scout Talk, what do you have in the works / plans as for how scouts communicate info to the rest of their realm? This is a question that's near and dear to my heart as well.
Yeah, so scouts are pretty far off as far as class implementation goes. As we've said, like, we're going to be working on support next. I think there's already some support infrastructure put in for like some of their networks and stuff. Not networks is like an internal term of like the ability combination set for them, so they can actually build songs as opposed to like spells and melee attacks and stuff that the other classes are doing.
Ooh.
So we're working in that sort of a direction. Scouts are like considerably farther off than that, because I think we got to do devouts, I think, after support, and I'm not sure what the order is right offhand because I haven't really looked, but scouts are sort of further off toward the end of the list rather than closer to the beginning as the classes we have now. So a lot of these mechanics are not things that are even being prototyped and have really a finalized design for them yet. So I don't know how much we really want to get into the minutiae of the details of like exactly how all of this works, but the general idea of them is that scouts will go out, be able to survey what's going on, be able to systemically not just like type in chat, hey, there's a thing over here, but to be able to actually use what we're calling cartography to like write down things on their map as a game feature, and then take those map updates to a cartographer that is an NPC that you can place on your plot, and turn in those updates to them, and then anybody who comes to that cartographer who's not a scout can get those updates, or another scout can get those updates and get those updates to their map, so that when they look at their map they can see, hey, a caravan was seen an hour ago at this location, headed this way, stuff like that. And then those information updates can be relayed between keeps, and then that's a way that players can sort of know what's going on in the world, not exactly in terms of like real-time updates that just magically everyone knows everything all the time, but in terms of like historical updates of like someone saw this at this time, and so it might be in that location. If you go detect a mine, you can say, I found a mine, I'll write this down and then take it back to the town, and then by the time somebody gets out there, maybe it has collapsed, or maybe it's been mined out or whatever, but you didn't necessarily know because the update that you had was old, right? So that's sort of the job of scouts, is to make those updates happen, to get their progression based on that, and then to ensure that their realm has the best idea, their best picture of what's going on in the world outside of their normal view, so that the other players of their realm can take that information and do important and interesting things with it.
In the beginning of your answer, I think you also mentioned some of the stuff that's going on with support classes. So do you have anything else that you could elaborate on that? Because we've got a question about how support classes are coming along.
Oh, okay. Yeah, support is the next set of classes. There's a design for their abilities. Like I said, we're putting together their network, their ability to do songs, and that comes with, in terms of the ability functionality, the ability to make the abilities in the ability builder is one thing, and then the way those abilities actually function as far as having like an aura around you that affects your allies or affects enemies or whatever, that's another bit of functionality that's in more the ability system as opposed to like the actual UI and the ability builder. So that's also getting worked on, and we're sort of working on those as we have time. with regard to the other systemic things that I mentioned and fixing bugs and doing balance adjustments on the existing classes that we're trying to work on. When there's time, we're also sort of working towards those. And that will be getting, as more and more of the ability bugs get fixed, we'll have more and more time to work on implementing the newer classes. And so scouts or supports are in a pretty good place as far as their design, I think. And they're starting to get some of their implementation in. I think we still have a long way to go as far as their asset side. So they have their instruments are going to need to be modeled. They're going to need animations, and they're going to need effects for their different songs to play and things like that. So there's a lot of that sort of thing that will still need to be made that hasn't been started yet. But we're getting started a little bit, like I said, on the ability builder side, and then a little bit on the actual ability functionality side to get a little bit ahead of where we need to be, because they're not on our current sprint plan. They're just something, as we're waiting for things or somebody's blocked by something else, we'll start working a little bit ahead on the next thing that we're going to be working on for support classes. So hopefully as we get into our next milestone, our next sprint, I should say, we will have that as our deliverable for the end of one of the upcoming milestones, and we'll see how long that takes and what resources we need to devote to them, and hopefully getting those in the game will make a big difference, because they have a lot of functions that make your group really a lot more synergistic, where your mages and healers tend to rely on blood a lot, and support classes are one of the classes that are really good at helping support other classes and give them the resources that they need. So maintaining stamina, maintaining blood, reducing panic, all those sorts of things. So right now you might feel a bit short if you're playing a mage or something, you're running low on blood, and there's nobody there to help you because you don't have your support class. But once those classes come in, then that will help mitigate that and compensate for that a little bit. So that it's really important, I think, for the game to have those, in addition to just providing movement speed. As everybody knows, that's sort of the big thing that a lot of people have looked at in other games. But they also have this resource role that is really important. So once they get in, I think that will be it'll be really good, because that will provide the full range of dynamic sort of support roles of the healer and the support class of working together to help keep their group well maintained and topped off for all the things they need.
Cool. Yeah, that's really detailed progress update. I see Andrew mentioned something that we should call out specifically in terms of the past year's big updates is building destruction.
Yeah.
Building destruction, walls falling down, says Andrew. Good point. That is a pretty massive and awesome addition to the game as well. X Batresh asks, or Batesh, as Camelot Unchained is a 3-realm game for guilds band together and fight the other realms, will there be a way to succeed solo play, or is there a huge drawback?
Yeah, so you can kind of look at the meta level of the game, where there are these 3 realms of players and they're fighting against each other. But breaking it down further, individual guilds may or may not have a whole lot to do with the other guilds or players on their server. So individual players don't even have to really be part of a guild if they don't want to. And so there are some systems built around that. There are obviously warbands. You can join a group without being part of a guild and run around and do things. There are campaigns that you can join where there's sort of a objective to be accomplished, and then resources devoted to that objective. So there might be specific contracts based on that campaign to help gather resources or produce items, or there might be important contracts for, say, escorting things or destroying certain things, killing enemies, things like that, that are part of a campaign that you can participate in without being necessarily part of a guild. And guilds can produce those, the realm will automatically produce some. So there'll be things like that out there to do. But at some level, you can also just go out and solo and engage both enemy crafters, who are going to be good targets for you if you're going into enemy territory, in order to prevent them from gathering their resources or producing their materials or whatever they're doing. And also engage with enemy players, because there are going to be, in addition to like the high level goals of like capturing territory, right, where you're out claiming plots and building castles and destroying castles and things like that. There are going to be other things in the world. There are going to be places of power. There are going to be, as we've talked about a little bit, resource nodes here and there. And there are going to be other small things kind of scattered around, such that if you were going to take a group of 20, 30, 100 players and just run around and do these small objectives, it would be total overkill. Like, there would be very little for them to do. And so it's better for individuals to go out and handle some of these smaller scale things. And as there are individuals from multiple realms all sort of trying to run around and do this stuff, they're going to encounter each other. And so you'll have, hopefully, some good small scale engagements where the big groups don't really need to go into those areas and do those things because it's not really helpful for them. They'd rather be off doing bigger, more important things like attacking castles. And so playing as a solo character, if you play a character that is really solo capable, obviously if you're playing like a healer, you're not going to necessarily be great all by yourself. You can play by yourself in a group that's not necessarily part of your guild, but just going out entirely alone and not having anybody else to help you out, you're not going to necessarily do really great. But other classes that are more self-reliant, self-sufficient, if you want to look at, like, especially, say, spirit mages are going to be potentially very good at that. Some of the other hybrids, like the devouts and the shapeshifters, are potentially another one. Certain classes are going to be not entirely self-sufficient, but have more of the tools that they would need in order to just fight 1v1s and do a relatively good job. You'll be able to run around in these areas and look at these smaller scale objectives and do something and have a good time, hopefully, without necessarily having any other players around that are on your team. Just engaging with whatever other players you run into, or just doing small groups, 1 or 2 or 3 people on working together is fine as well.
Bobo Deak asks, will we aim with catapults at precise points on walls, or will we aim by evaluating distance and height to shoot where we want, like in Angry Birds, or is it not fully decided yet?
So there are 2 aiming systems for the game right now. One of them is just your standard either click to target or tab target, whatever you want to call it, where you have a selected target and then projectiles will automatically try to hit that target. They have they're still using physics, so there's some uncertainty as to whether they actually will hit that target if something else gets in the way, if that target is too far away, if they're hiding behind cover or something. Projectiles don't just automatically hit their targets like they do in some other games that aren't actually using physics. Since we're using realistic physics, if something's in the way of your projectile, it hits whatever's in the way, because in physics that's what it would actually do. But when you get into our other aiming mode, there's actual targeted aiming. So there's manual aiming and sort of tab target aiming. When you're in manual aiming, there's a specific point that you're aiming at, which can be up to the maximum distance that your projectile would go, again, based on physics. So based on its velocity, it has a gravity factor modifier, and there are some other things like I think tracking can affect it. But you'll be able to say at what point exactly in the world you want to try to aim at, and then that will inform the siege engine or even archery, whatever range attack you're using, that's where your projectile is going to end up at going. So that allows you to aim right now very precisely. It's not necessarily entirely determined that this system is going to be as precise as it is now forever, but right now it's the way it is because for testing, if we didn't know exactly where the projectile was going to go, it would be hard to know if it was doing what it was supposed to be doing. So now we know if it's supposed to go exactly to one place and it's not, then there's a bug, right? So right now it's more precise. Later it might not be quite so precise. But generally it's not quite an Angry Birds of like, well, I'm just using, 15 degrees of elevation and 100 pounds of, power to push. Like, that doesn't really allow us to have the degree of precision that we want to be able to have. And we can make it less precise just by, increasing the size of the reticle of where, it's not exactly a reticle, it's like a ground target indicator, right? But increasing the size of the area we're allowing you to target will reduce the certainty of where exactly it's going to land without necessarily going to that kind of a level where you're just giving it inputs and then hoping it goes somewhere in the right direction.
Mr. Peace 84 asks, since we now know that there are going to be portal doors, What incentives will builders have in placing normal doors, since enemies can interfere with the opening mechanism?
Sure. So, a couple of things on that. The portal doors. So the way that works is it's like a small portal, like for a single person. So if you go to the door, it will teleport you to the other side. If there's anything on the other side preventing you from appearing there, it won't work. So if enemies just run up and stand there, or put something there, or parts of the building fall off and land there, you can't use that portal anymore. Also, because it's only like one person at a time, if you have like 50 people, remember this is a large scale game, right? Hundreds of players, thousands of players can be on the screen fighting in a battle. If you're trying to take 1,000 players out of a keep one at a time, it's going to be very slow. But if you just open the doors, then all the players can get out like relatively quickly. The doors still is only going to allow you so many, so it's going to still take time. Right. But a lot more than just one at a time. And so there's a big reason just for that of having more room for players to get out. Another reason is that in order to have caravans, in order to have anything large coming into your keep, you're going to need to open the main doors. And so if you just leave the main doors open, that'll allow caravans to come in, but it'll also allow enemies to just walk right in. So you'll probably want to open the doors, let things in, and then close the doors, and most of the time have them closed, which doesn't necessarily allow players who don't have door permissions to open them. So a way for those players to still get into your keep, it's like, okay, well, we'll let allies who are on our same realm use the portal door, but not open the main door, because we're a little bit worried that maybe somebody who we don't necessarily get along with very well, or somebody who's griefing, or is cross-realming or something like that, they could just open our door and let all the enemies in. So we don't want to let them do that. But we will say, okay, we assume there's probably a bunch of players on our realm who are not nefarious, who are legitimately trying to help us, and if our castle is under attack, we want them to be able to get in. We'll just let them use the portal door, and then that will allow them to get in without opening the main door and necessarily let other bad things happen. But yeah, still having the main door so that you can let caravans in, so that you can have a larger number of players get in and out all at the same time. If you're having like, your big warband coming in all at once, you just want to open the main door, let them all in, close the door behind them. But if it's under attack, then there's times when you only are going to want to be able to use the smaller door, just so that you don't worry about players getting into the larger door.
So in a way, it's a lot like the real-world giant castle doors, and then you have the sally port.
Yeah, it's like a postern door on a keep. Yeah, so you would only have a small door. Typically, those are like down very long, straight hallways where like, they break it down, this small little door on the back of the keep, like, okay, they can get into this narrow hallway and fight like one at a time. So you can engineer your structure sort of that way. And it's probably not the best way to break in, even if you can, to a keep, just because it's not structured in such a way. So we'll see what players do. They can structure this however they want. If they want to have a whole bunch of very small doors, they still will want to probably have a large like main door to be able to let caravans come in, because that's how you're going to resupply. That's how you're going to bring in, additional guards to replace the guards that are getting killed. That's going to allow you to bring in repair materials, because your keep is going to take damage and get destroyed. It's going to allow you to bring in ammunition for all the siege engines that you're using to shoot back at enemy siege engines that are attacking you. So you're going to want to probably still have that main door to any structure that you're building that's not just a house or something. But these other doors, I think, are a really useful tool that will allow players to get into places and not necessarily let enemies in, and perhaps do some raids and things out to attack the enemies who are coming in to maybe destroy their siege engines, or just run out really quick and do a sortie and do some damage and then run back in. Yeah, and get back in without getting killed, without risking opening that main door. So I think it's we'll see how it works out. There's still some mechanics that will have to be tested, and again, because this is just all theory until you try it out. But once we get into doing some of that, there's already some discussions about, well, how long will the timer have to be to use these sorts of doors? Will we need to put a limiter so that you can only use the door so often, so you can't just like jump out of the door, shoot an arrow, jump back in the door immediately, some things like that. So we'll see how that all works out balance-wise. But again, that's sort of the same thing as like, well, how much damage should this ability do? How long should this debuff last? All of those things are just numbers tuning once it gets in. And then if there's any big mechanical adjustments to things like, well, the postern doors should actually, not let people out more than once every 10 seconds. And so it's longer between people or whatever. There's a lot of those sorts of things that we'll get into adjusting once we've had some experience with them and had a chance to see how it actually works out in practice.
It's a really interesting topic. We'll try to fit a few more questions in here, though. Fubuwu asks, for Max, has MJ kept the world lore mostly secret? I enjoy origin stories and was wondering if you have a general outline to the coming of the emissaries backdrop to the game. I do not. MJ has kept that kind of thing and stuff about dragons mostly secret. So I work with the knowledge that I have in terms of the lore, and some of those things are a mystery. Some of them are kept intentionally mysterious, and some are mysterious because we haven't quite worked out all of the details in terms of the lore, and some things are mysterious because that's just how they are. Swipper asks, can we see the enemy's panic level, or will it be hidden?
Yeah, so that will be part of the resource display on the unit frames. So as you have someone targeted, you will see what their health level is, what their blood level is, those resources. So panic is included in that.
Here's an interesting question. H-Toll Sipa H. A bit off topic. Maybe we should save this for the end. What do you think?
Well, I'll have to read it now.
Should we save that one for the end?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Yeah, we can.
All right. H-Toll, we're going to save that one for the end. Which is only a couple minutes from now, anyway.
If there's anything else.
Let's just see if there's a... a couple of people are asking if there's going to be anything in-game, like the races from below the ground.
So there's certainly going to be the depths at some point. We haven't really gotten into... I mean, we did get a little bit into building cave sets in terms of assets, but the technologies to actually make those appear in the world and go under the ground haven't been really worked on extensively yet. But I don't know as far as like the lore and story behind those. We definitely want to have underground areas for things like mines, especially for the depths, for some like hidden crypts and things like that. I think that's going to be really fun. And that'll be a switch up from the way that you normally play the game in sort of an open world outdoor sort of an area. But I don't know in terms of like thematics and stuff if that's going to be based around some of that stuff that's in the lore or not.
Well, I mean, thematically, we certainly could have more races from... Right now, I guess the races that have stories that link them to the inner world are both Viking. I don't know if we will have another race from a different realm that is from the inner world. We'll have to see.
Where were the golems from?
The golems?
Yeah.
Well, they're not from like a particular region. They are kind of wandering. They're actually from the depths in a way.
Yeah. So they're kind of underground, like
in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're clay, and the well, you'll have to read the golem story to get the full story. I particularly like how that one turned out. It's in 3 parts. Okay, ready for our last question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. H-Toll Sipa H asks, a bit off topic, but how did you both join City State Entertainment? What interested you the most in it? Now, of course, I have a story that has been told on stream a bunch of times, and I'm perfectly willing to retell it, but I don't actually know your story.
Okay, so my story was previous to here, I was working at Red 5 Studios. Some of you may be familiar with Firefall. Probably not a lot of you, because it wasn't a really big game. But that was out in California. And so while I was working there, back to the Kickstarter for this game, because before that, I had worked at Mythic, and then went on to BioWare. And so I was familiar with Mark, I was familiar with Dark Age of Camelot, and so I immediately backed the Kickstarter, and I was like, cool, whenever this game comes out, I definitely want to play it. And then if you do follow the history of Firefall, know things didn't work out for that game. Eventually ended up looking for other opportunities, and I ended up talking to Mark because he didn't have anything that was necessarily advertised or anything, but because I knew him from Mythic, I was like, hey, what's going on with your game? Are you going to be hiring for this because you're making an MMO, right? And he said, yeah, sure, just come work out here, and we'll do some design for this, and that's sort of how I ended up here. And the other part of that was like what interested me about it. So I've been playing MMOs since like the beta of EverQuest, and largely that has been doing PvP. So like on the EverQuest Zek servers, on like AC Darktide, like Dark Age of Camelot, of course, PlanetSide, Eve, Shadowbane, all of that stuff, right? And so when I first started in game design, I was working on Warhammer Online, which was another PvP MMO, and I've done PvP and MMOs professionally since then. I did PvP for SWTOR, as some of you know, and then Firefall I was doing PvP. We did some esports, some open world PvP as part of that. And so this just sort of is my thing, is working on MMO PvP whenever I can get the opportunity to. And so this is, or I should say it was at the time, one of a few MMOs that was trying to do a heavy basis in PvP. There was, of course, Guild Wars, and I think ESO was not out for then, but it was in development, that had done sort of sideshow PvP, right, where the main game is one thing and then PvP is something else. But there weren't a lot of MMOs sort of going in a real heavy PvP direction like this. And so this was, out of the projects that were available at the time, was one of the ones I was really the most interested in. And so, as it's turned out since then, a lot of MMOs have gone in the more PvP-centric route, and we've got a lot more of these sort of sandbox games that are sort of MMO light or pseudo MMOs or whatever you want to call it, right? Where it's like it's a large number of players playing, PvP in a sandbox, right? So a lot of games have gone in this direction. But when the CU Kickstarter first started and shortly thereafter, there weren't a lot of games doing this, and that was one of the reasons that Mark has said that he started doing this, was because this was an underserved market where there weren't a lot of games for PvPers out there. And so that was what I got, why I got interested in it, and why I wanted to work on this game as opposed to other games, because it was, one of the rare games at the time that was really up the sort of game that I was the most interested in playing and working on.
That's awesome. For me, there is I guess a kind of a funny story associated with this that I've told a couple of different times. Basically, I moved to the area. I was moving to the area from Los Angeles to take care of my grandmother, and was looking for opportunities in the area, and I happened across the Kickstarter for Camelot Unchained. I was reading up on it, and I saw that Mark said that I'm going to need to hire a writer at some point. So I said, aha, I have those skills. So in doing research for it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is based on 3 mythologies that I'm pretty familiar with, to the point where I did, like departmental theses on them. I love the game's concept, and what really interested me was description of the depths and the Lovecraftian and post-apocalyptic elements of the lore of the game. And I said, I got to get in on this. So when we did move here, I I tracked down the office. I showed up one day and I said, I gotta, get these people to talk to me because I feel like I'm gonna explode. So, I had learned a way of presenting oneself, which is to show up with a fruit plate. So these guys got somebody knocking on their door, resume folder in one hand, fruit plate in the other, and I just brought them some fruit and said hi. And Renee answered the door at the time, and then brought Andrew over because MJ wasn't in that day, or he was busy or something. And Andrew was like, "Who are you and why did you bring us fruit?" And Tim like yelled from the back like, "Are you a backer?" And I was like, "No." I missed the Kickstarter, but I'm interested in working here. And Mark took a look at my stuff and we talked, and here I am. And the rest is history.
So who told you to bring fruit?
Well, back in LA, I had a job for a while as a insurance salesman, and I was going around with somebody to kind of shadow them, and that was his secret, now revealed to the world. He said, the way you get in to talk to people who don't want to talk to you is you bring a fruit plate. So we went to the store and we bought like 10 of them, and it totally worked. He was a much better salesman than I ever became. But it totally worked. He said, you don't bring donuts because you never know who's on a diet. You don't bring coffee because everybody has like a specific way they want their coffee. Fruit plate is the safest bet, and it doesn't open every door, but it is a nice thing to do.
I guess that's fine for normal humans. Come to a game dev studio with fruit, nobody knows what to do with it.
Right. Well, I don't know. I heard you guys ate it. Once you got over the initial fear, no doubt. Okay. I think we are done with the stream. So, thank you all very much for joining us for the end of week wrap up and Q&A with Ben and Max and Ben. We read the highlights. We took questions. Keep an eye out for emails for various information, tests in the upcoming week, etc. I have no idea. I don't think there's a test scheduled for the weekend, but I don't actually know for sure.
Yeah, we didn't really.
Hey, Farinelli, is there a test this weekend? No. We don't think so. He's going to double check.
No one knows.
I think he's double checking. But I don't think there is.
Yeah, I don't think we have one scheduled. We didn't stage a build on Wednesday that I'm aware of.
Right.
If there's a test, it'll be the same build that we did last week.
Okay. One of our producers, Svarty, Farinelli. No test this weekend.
Okay.
All right. Well, keep an eye out for emails, and we will see you later.
Yeah, send out an update, right?
Yeah, we're currently planning to send out an update. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with it because the people who normally work on that are out sick. So
okay.
We'll see. Maybe we'll put something together for you folks to read and enjoy. But in any case, anything else?
Nope, I think that's
all right.
it.
See you later, folks.
See you later.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.